Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. This is episode 109.
I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
Welcome back, Otterites. So, we are doing pop culture this week. This is our fourth Friday of the month. And this is the Friday before the first week of July, which is the best week of the year.
Somebody has a birthday.
Yeah, not because it's Independence Day and the birth of our wonderful nation, but because it's
Robert's
birthday.
Robert's birthday. Yes, that's right.
So, happy birthday to Robert.
Yes.
So, we're going to talk about music. As Francis said at the end of the last episode, we're going to talk about something we have yet to talk about.
Yeah,
108 episodes in the can, plus a couple of minor specials.
Yeah.
And we have yet to talk about something that is very near and dear to all of our hearts.
Yeah.
We all have our favorite. I mean, everybody has their favorite music.
But music's also a good way to start a fight.
It is.
When you start talking music, people's music choices are very, very personal.
They are. They're very personal. You get invested in it. You know, all those concerts you go to see. It really is personal. It's social. All at the same time. So we'd kicked around a couple of different ways to go about this. We were talking about looking at music and who was the most significant. I had approached it when Martin and I were talking about it in the production meeting. I was thinking of it more as a personal take on it, who was either most influential or favorites kind of a thing. I think eventually we just settled on, let's just talk about whatever the hell we want, because that's the kind of guys we are.
Let's not overproduce this, guys. Come on. Yeah, there's a value to that.
Well, we always let the show take us where it will. In a way, it's kind of like a code of honor, where I think we all have something equally to bring. So as the captain, I will call on one of you to start with whichever aspect of that you want to talk about, either favorite, most influential to you, or most influential to the world. I think any one of those is a valid starting point for discussion.
Well, if Francis will give me leave,
I will. Just no hating. That's all he asks.
Oh, no.
No hating.
No hating. Nope.
That's our only rule.
I think I want to start with somebody that I think can then enable both Robert and Francis to build on with some of theirs.
Let's see how well you know us.
Okay. Well, I know for sure this will work with some of the things that Robert wants to talk about. But the band that I revere probably the most from those early rock pioneers is The Who. Now,
Very
Beatles, of course, super important. The Beatles are the first band to really say that rock and roll could be about more than just going to the sock hop at the high school.
Right.
Yeah, they changed everything. There's truth to that.
Stones also. Rolling Stones, they're the first band to bring overt sexuality to rock and roll, which is something it has to have.
As opposed to the subtle hip swaying of Elvis.
Yeah. There was an undercurrent before, but they decided just pull the mask off and let's be overt about it.
I mean, you're right. The jump from Elvis, where it's still somewhat subliminal, kind of implied.
Well, those teenage girls didn't think it was subliminal.
Yeah,
but yes,
it still is.
But it was still implied.
But it's a jump
to
go from Elvis to let's spend the night together, and I can't get no satisfaction.
Yeah. Well, which ironically, they had to, when they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, they had to rename, they had to sing a different song instead of let's spend some time together.
Spend some time together.
Mr. and Mrs. America in the late 60s was not prepared for that.
They were not ready for that.
The kids were, but they weren't.
And that says a lot about the cultural imperatives of the time, because it's hard to imagine them changing the words of a song.
That's correct. Well, see, but they were still, I won't say still hungry. They were very popular at the time, because that was 7-8 years into they were still, a huge force.
That was...
music was
still 2 years in, something like that.
Yeah.
So that was still, 65, their appearance?
I thought it was later than that, but I may be wrong.
Well, were they in suits?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, it's going to be around 65 then.
Because Let's Spend the Night Together is an early Stones hit.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and you got to remember, music at the time was very corporately controlled, far more so than today.
Very much, because you didn't get airplay. if you
Right.
don't do that, and it's the only way you can get popular. Albums were just becoming a thing
Yes.
then. By the time 68, 69 rolls around, it's over. It's all that.
Yes.
But in 65, it's still a little embryonic.
Yeah. But for me, and you talk about the album as a form, for me, The Who then are the band that launched this idea of the long form.
Yeah, the vinyl, the album. Two
And at the
sides
same
of
time, though,
orchestrated a certain way.
they are still the prototypical early rock band because you've got this My Generation still only like a 2.5 minute, 3 minute song. So it's still the same thing of these quick songs. There's this 3 chords and rock and roll, but then you move from that to Tommy and Who's Next, and the 9-minute version of Won't Get Fooled Again, and Quadrophenia. So to me, that without the Who, there's no like stadium rock, but at the same time, then there's no progressive rock. There's no punk because punk is hearkening back to My Generation. You know, the Ramones and Blondie and the idea of a 2.5 minute song with 3 chords. That's My Generation. But it's also, they're the progenitors to me of New Wave because they're one of the first bands that's putting their appearance and the look of the band as part and parcel of what they are.
Yeah, that's...
So they're kind of the first of this. We're gonna, smush fashion into this, and then also to me, they're really the beginnings of making the rock song personal, of really making it about your angst and about your.
It's not bubblegum rock anymore.
Right. Again,
Just like the Beatles. I mean, that's where they started. That's where that started.
Yeah, they're bringing
bubblegum. That's the sock
politics.
top.
Yeah, they're bringing the politics. The
Love Me
bubblegum.
Do, Please Please Me, all those very, very early Beatles, they're very much of that type.
Yeah.
But they were talented.
Yeah.
And they were finally able to get themselves to a certain tipping point where, and it comes in their mid of their early section, Rubber Soul, basically.
Rubber Soul,
is
yes.
when they decided, we're big enough, let's do what we want.
Yeah,
and
so
it changed
they're-
everything.
They're bringing the social commentary, the politics in, and again, the Stones bringing in the sexuality more. And here's the Who then bringing in this very angsty Pete Townsend personal. I want to die before I get old.
Which,
idea.
ironically, he did not. He's still around.
Still
Yes.
around. So to me, that's the Who. Is this band that you just can't do without.
They were a good bridge between the radio play and the album play.
Yeah.
They understood the value of both, and they were able to work, in different times,
Right.
in different ways, things. Because Who's Next is one of the greatest albums ever
I love
recorded.
Who's
It's
Next.
still got
Yes.
some of the very best stuff. And
Love Bob O'Reilly.
most of those songs, I don't want to say most, but certainly a huge number of those songs are still played on air radio today
Yeah.
and always will be. And they were enormous back in the day. And yet people bought that album. And by the time the 70s comes along, it's album oriented. And you have concept albums, like Tommy. They don't always work. Kiss did one in the early 80s called The Elder, which absolutely almost destroyed their reputation. And I think it was a Paul Stanley thing that he put together. Let's say, let's do this story within there.
Yeah, music
And
from The Elder.
that's exactly it. And nobody know. Rumor has it one of the songs on there Gene Simmons tried to play in the 90s and forgot the words. So at concerts, I don't think that went over very well.
But the Who again, this destroy the instruments on stage.
Yeah, unheard of.
Make a show of everything, but at the same time, this great quality music that you hear on the radio, it holds up. And holds up as a long form.
Yeah. Others
So
tried to
it's-
copy their stage antics,
Yeah.
but rarely did they also have the talent, the
Yeah.
musical talent that those guys all had.
Yeah. So again, this punk doesn't exist without the Who. To me, new wave
I don't
doesn't
know.
exist without the Who.
I don't know. I think I might disagree with that.
I wouldn't give it all to them, but they were
so-
influential. I would say that.
Well,
But the punk is such a harkening back to those days, those early
yeah,
days.
but when you look at what's generally considered the influences on punk rock, Who is nowhere to be found in those kinds of discussions. I think there's commonalities. I think it's one of those correlation kind of things. I think that's more of an outgrowth of the culture.
They were both
of things
tapping
that-
into the same thing, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it's more of that than so much a one preceding the other by cause.
Teenage angst, by definition, is one of the driving forces of much music. It's
Oh, yeah.
always a thing. That's
Oh,
and it always will be.
absolutely.
Of rock and roll.
Of rock
Absolutely.
and roll in particular, but many others too.
So yeah, there may have been some influence because especially with punk and new wave, not all of it because actually the first punk scene is in the U.S., but some of the most famous are from England. So there's going to be Beatles and the Who and Stones influences, whether they realize it or not. But I think some of the overt stuff, not so much. I think everybody was starting to do fashion statements. I mean, look at the Beatles when they got to Sgt. Pepper's.
Oh,
Yeah.
huge, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned Sgt. Pepper's because in many respects that's another one of those watershed albums.
Yes, it
Yes.
is.
It's
it and the
huge.
White Album are.
Yeah, and Sgt. Pepper's is the turn when they realized, they had done at Rubber Soul, they'd done Revolver, and I think there's another one along through that where they were kind of doing their own thing, and they kind of took a little bit of break to do Sgt. Pepper's, and they said, we are so big, and this is John Lennon bigger than Jesus type the time, that let's really go weird. And of course then drugs get brought in, and all of a sudden everything takes a very, not a darker turn, it's actually just a more, I guess, freer turn.
Yeah.
And this is, because Sgt. Pepper's is like 66, or maybe 67, and all of a sudden everything's different. And you because the music's different. The music is extremely different. It's a quasi concept album.
Well-
The music themselves,
Yeah.
it's not, but it's kind
Yeah.
of put in an umbrella between the beginning and the end of the album.
It's one of, if not the first album in the sense that we were just talking about. I think
It's deliberately
it's
constructed and
conceived of as a
structured.
whole as opposed to a
That's
series
right.
of singles.
Exactly, even though there are quite a few singles off that album.
Well, yeah, because Good One Will Be.
Yeah.
So I think we talked about the Woodstock phenomenon. We very much tied that into a lot of the cultural events of the day.
Well,
And
Sgt.
I think
Pepper's
all of
is
this
one of the
is
things that kind of was the beginning spark that led to that,
Sure.
because everything was experimental then. Of course, the drug use became a lot of it.
Yeah.
But for God's sakes, the Rolling Stones put out their Satanic Majesty's Request, which is it's a mock of that. I mean, if you look at the front cover of it, it's the Sgt. Pepper's done with them, totally different. The guys in weird costumes with all sorts of stuffing going on around. I mean, the Stones and the Beatles, they knew very well. They both read the times and the cultural movements, which I think is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
There's a something here that we're tapping into. I
It
think
was
it's art reflecting life more than creating life. Although in the end,
well, those are cyclical.
they're cyclical, exactly,
They
because-
feed on each other.
yeah, because they were successful at it, that all of a sudden it took a new turn.
Well, when you look at what we were talking about that Woodstock episode and the cultural stuff that's going on, there's an explosion of, except in the cinema when it all goes to cop shows and cop movies, there's an explosion of different kinds of creativity. When you look at the art
Yeah.
scene in the 60s, probably kind of led the way in many ways, although not necessarily certainly all of it. And I think the music is kind of an outgrowth of that. There's always been underground music to a degree. So you look in the 50s, that's the beatnik kind of stuff.
Yes.
So
Yeah, well, Buddy Holly was considered to be a juvenile delinquent.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it was you're not supposed to do that stuff. And,
exactly. So the underground stuff that you saw in the 60s is probably where more of that punk stuff comes from. In the U.S., it's probably it's got a different creation than in England, because in
Yes.
England it is political and economic driven.
Yes. Yes.
And that's an entirely different thing. It may be more economic in the U.S., but there's
it might just be a boredom thing.
it might be a boredom thing.
because it's not whereas Vietnam was a great reactionary thing in the late 60s, early 70s. By the time the 80s come along, that's gone.
Right. So, when you see this stuff come up, even though there's lots of people we would consider alternative today, existed way before punk started in the mid-'70s, when it truly started. There's influences. So, like Bowie. We would consider Bowie more of an alternative kind of music.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned him.
Very much a new wave influence.
Yes.
Right.
But he precedes both punk and new wave.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
So does Blondie, in fact.
Yes.
Precedes both, which I didn't realize they were around a lot longer than we thought. But during that time, the bands that I listened to all got their start all in that 75 to 80 time frame. It was a huge explosion of talent, directly tied back to that punk, because anything went. Because and this is where maybe some of that influence, because everything they started that. Yeah, and they mainstreamed anything goes. So
right. So and that's what's so striking to me about the Who is, again, that this you could claim arena rock comes from the Who. These huge shows.
Well, but
at the same time, with the destruction of their instruments and short songs, then punk is kind of this whole. It's a reaction to arena rock, but coming from the same DNA as the Who.
Well, and not all of it went in the punk direction. Kiss is a great example because they around that time as the Who is moving on, Gene Simmons, Paul Stanley, and these guys come together, and you're spurting blood, you're wearing makeup, you're smashing guitars.
They are probably the full on collision of hard rock, glam rock, and that punk alternative protest kind of stuff. Because they've got all the elements. The arena rock, the big shows, huge. They pull it all together.
Oh yeah, I saw them in concert in '81. I think it was in Rupp Arena, and they really musically, if you just distill them down to the music, they are damn talented. Which is one of the reasons that their albums have continued to sell. Even today, they're still big. But their image kind of went. That's why everybody quote unquote hated them. It's like Ozzy Osbourne. Everybody quote unquote hated them if you're an establishment person.
I'm having a very hard time picturing Francis with a Paul Stanley star painted on. You
won't see that. I was there just as I am. That's right. I had
that's so
maybe a little more hair, but
that's so disappointing.
Oh, I loved that concert. They made the stage into a battle tank. It was one of those. It was after Peter Criss had his drug issues. He left. Eric Carr was who was an employee. He wasn't a member of Kiss. They basically Kiss. They had hired him.
Yeah.
Poor guy. He dies of some strange form of cancer in the early '90s. I mean, he's like in his 30s. He was a talented drummer.
So you would have also been at almost the tipping point then of Ace Frehley leaving and Vinnie Vincent coming in.
No, it was before that. It was before. Yeah, so that was when they took the make-off off for the first time.
Yeah, so you would have seen Ace Frehley. So you would have been about the time of the Dynasty tour.
I want to say that might be exactly it. That sounds about right.
Robert knows nothing of what we're talking about.
Well, no, I know some of it because lived next door to a kid. It was the only neighbor I had that was a kid, so he was totally into Kiss. I mean, he was really.
When I was in the
his mom hated it because she was one of those real strict Baptist kind of moms.
There you go.
And they were Satanists.
That's exactly it. There's a visceral reaction from the establishment to this, which of course made the kids love it that much more.
Right.
In the 6th grade, we were bringing in Kiss albums to play in our school on Fridays.
Oh yeah, Kiss was huge. That was
it was you better like Kiss. It was just your thing back in then. Yeah. They were so influential in those late 70s, and they stuck it out. They really have. They've done a really. I mean, if you listen to some of their stuff, I mean, my God, Beth is still one of the most requested songs out there, and that's It doesn't sound like them, but it is.
Yeah. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
So we went from the Who to Kiss, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on Kiss, but Francis, let's do. I brought up the Who. Let's bring up something.
We've done a lot of this already, but I do think that if you're talking about influence, you kind of have to start with the Beatles. It really is that. We've talked a lot about them, and I'm going to belabor a lot of that, but I still think they are the ones that. They made $1 gazillion. Lennon and McCartney are two.
Well, somebody made $1 gazillion, not necessarily them.
Right. And after Lennon's death, and I remember remember hearing it on the radio the day it happened. I literally turned on the.
December 1980, right?
That's exactly right. I remember the alarm coming on that morning, and I had it tuned to the local rock and roll station. And that was the headline at the top of the hour when I woke up, and I was stunned. I was stunned because I was in my Beatles phase. I think all of us go through a Beatles phase at some point. My son went through a Beatles phase.
Yeah.
At the same
My son
time,
did too, because the Beatles rock band, we had the guitar for the
Yeah.
Wii, and oh man, was he good.
Well,
I don't
because the
think these
music
two-
is that.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that timeless.
It is.
really
It's important.
They are very Lennon in particular. McCartney is good. I love McCartney, and he's still around. He's one of the wealthiest guys in the world, but he's a pretty decent guy. But I think Lennon was, in many respects, the real juice that made them go further. McCartney would have stayed safe. Lennon was willing to push and to go further. But the two of them together, and I don't want to slight George Harrison because some of his stuff is fantastically good. It's very different.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a reason that Lennon McCartney is a shorthand for great songwriting.
That's right.
Yeah,
And that kind of leads me to my point is, if you want to look at somebody influential, you're looking at those who write their own material.
yeah,
It ain't worth a darn if you're just covering people.
right. And again, the Who, Pete Townsend, the primary songwriter,
Right. They did it. They had
he's
it covered.
writing about
If-
his
That's right.
angst
That's
and
right.
his issues.
And that's kind of where and the Stones did it too.
Yeah.
I mean, Jagger and Keith Richards together, they write some good shit, and they had a hell of a lot more sustained career than the Beatles did.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, McCartney did some great stuff with Wings. I love Wings. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Great, one of the best jokes ever. I didn't know Paul McCartney was in a band before Wings, which kids nowadays don't get. But
Yeah.
that was a time. That's right.
At the time, that was the funniest joke you heard.
yeah,
And he did a really great job with some great stuff. Lennon did some great stuff. Double Fantasy was a really good album. I think it was overplayed because it came out right about the time of his death. It doesn't get a lot of play
Yeah.
now. Very little, other than Imagine. Most of Lennon's post Beatles career doesn't fly much because he didn't have McCartney to rein him in. That's one of the reasons the two of them together were stronger than each of them separately. Nevertheless, they both did some really good stuff.
I mean, I think there was there was a realization from McCartney that it still had to entertain
Uh-huh.
in a certain way,
Right.
continue to be
He had
appealing.
I think McCartney
Where-
was more commercial,
Yeah,
and
and
Lennon was a bit more radical, but
yeah, Lennon's trying to make the social statement.
correct, and McCartney less so.
Yeah.
Although I suspect if you would ask either one of them that, they would deny that.
Yeah.
I think they were. I don't want to pigeonhole them too much.
Let me just mention here that I loathe Imagine.
I do too.
Oh
I
yeah,
know that.
absolutely.
Absolutely, and I think it has been anointed as this some sort of an anthem for the way the world is supposed to be, and I'm thinking the entire message that you're having here is dehumanize and take away things people value.
But think about who are the people that like that sort of stuff.
No.
It's it's the left wing neo-Marxists.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
And-
It's a long way from Revolution in the White Album, talking about if you're carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you're not going to make it with anybody anyhow. And yet, here, just about 9 years later, Lennon is basically espousing those principles.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loathe that song. I think it is.
It is the song of the moral relativists.
very good. Thank you. There's
It's the moral relativist anthem.
Yeah, the cultural Marxist anthem.
Yeah.
do away with anything that we don't agree with. Which irony is, of course, what happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah.
So, as you guys know, my kind of music is the punk alternative stuff. Now, when I first started listening to music, this is not where I started. So when I first started listening, because all you had was the radio, used to listen to Casey Kasem's Top 40 and all that.
Sure.
And, listen to the songs I like, go up and down the list every week, and used to go to bed with the radio on, like a lot of...
First album you bought with your own money.
Oh, gosh. I'm not even sure.
It may have been Sgt. Pepper's, but actually, I think, and I can tell you this because I bought it in Lexington at a used record store. Journey's first album with Steve Perry, Infinity, absolutely freaking amazing album. I know
Yeah,
you
with
hate-
my own money,
you
that's a
hate
hard
Journey,
one.
I know that, but I love them.
Money I earned probably would have been in college, so probably would have been Susie and the Banshees, maybe something like that.
Marty Robbins, Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs.
Really?
Awesome.
Well, if you want to
Awesome.
go, well, see, I didn't buy it with my own money, but the first album I ever bought with, that I had to twist my mother's arm to buy was John Denver's Greatest Hits in 1970.
Save up
Yeah,
my
see, you know,
allowance. And
with something like that I was gotten for me was probably, well, when I talk about first album, I think it was Alvin and the Chipmunks Christmas album, but I think we probably mean something a little later than
anyway,
that.
one of those Kate Tail albums,
something that-
Starburst. I think I got in
Something
Christmas
that
'78.
you yourself
Yeah.
want.
Well, I remember having
Or became
back in the
influenced
day.
by.
I think there was an 8-track of AC/DC.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
The Back in Black.
I had Billy Joel Glass Houses on 8-track,
Oh,
and I had a
I
Toto 8-track.
Toto was great. Toto was fan. Do you know Africa is the #1 pop song selling of all time, or played, or something? I forget exactly.
Yeah,
what it was.
yeah.
It's like the
most
number
requested,
one. It's the
or
most. I forget exactly
something,
what it
yeah.
is.
Wow.
But yeah, it's huge, and I love the song. I've always loved
Yeah.
the song.
This was like the 8-track before that one, though.
Oh,
This
this
was
was
like Rose-
Monkey's Greatest Hits.
Oh, that's a good one.
I love the Monkees. You guys remember?
That's
the
the first one that I think.
Yeah.
The real music.
It
so to
was
That's
speak.
good
we
stuff.
were teeny
Oh, it
weeny
is.
when the show was on.
Oh,
I
loved it.
remember
My
watching
son
it.
loves it.
Yeah, I remember watching
Yeah.
it, and it was for being a faux group to begin with, brought together by corporate interests. They were amazing and still are. I mean,
Well,
Davy Jones, I know, has passed away.
Mickey Dolenz was really the only professional musician among them.
Right.
When they started, Davy Jones could sing, and
was
the others
Teen
were
Idol, which
yeah,
helped.
Teen Idol, yeah,
But Nesmith could play.
yeah, he could.
He could play.
yeah.
And so it was kind of a perfect storm, American version of the Beatles.
And they just some of their music still holds up today.
It does.
They did an amazing job.
Yeah.
And some of it was what was written for him.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah.
good stuff that
Yeah.
holds up today.
Well,
but some of the
it's
stuff
original
they wrote,
music.
yeah,
It's
some of the
original
they
stuff,
wrote
and
was
that
good.
kind of goes back to the thing: is you can't cover somebody. You've got to have something that
Well,
says
even so-
we're who we are.
You can't, to be really good, you can't do that only.
Only correct. That's right.
Yeah,
That's
because
all
a
you
lot
do.
of bands do some really good covers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But in addition to their
And
own
even
stuff.
some bands have even done full cover albums that have been really good. As long as they bring their own take to it, it makes us. That's
right.
the thing. But anyway, so it wasn't until college, appropriately enough, because that's usually where this stuff comes into play, that I really got into the alternative music stuff, and that was because of Joan, the girl I dated in college.
Okay.
And because she was real big into Susie and the Banshees and The Cure, and that's actually the first alternative group I ever heard was actually the Psychedelic Furs,
Oh yeah.
which we went and saw, in Memphis, and then the wife and I went and saw them again when they came to Louisville.
I didn't know that. Oh,
Yeah, the following year, but I was introduced to them by a good buddy, Andy Clayton. Not a good buddy, but in high school, kind of a good buddy. Somebody you knew and did stuff with in theater and what have you. But I think he brought me home one night from a play practice or something. I took him. I don't remember, but he was playing the Furs, and that was just awesome. I don't even remember what album it was, but I fell in love with that stuff. That was great.
There's always those moments of
Yeah.
something that you hear for the first time, and you realize, wow, that's good. That works for me.
So then I was open to that when later when met up with her, but that kind of music is what got me started. Susie and the Banshees and The Cure. Those are probably the two that really, for
And then,
me.
of course, the Police hit.
Yes.
Like,
Well, they had hit in the 70s.
Right, late 70s.
They started they started like mid 70s. They were one of those underground garage kind of bands.
Yes, they were becoming
in the beginning
bigger
of punk.
in Europe. I remember hearing them for the first time I heard their name. I heard them on a list of something out of one of these radio stations. I'm thinking, who the heck is that? Because this is before Zenyatta Madonna, right before that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's not only a few months later when folks around me started singing Roxanne. I'm thinking, what is this?
Yeah, they were big, so to speak.
Europe.
Well, no, that's not where I'm going.
Oh.
In that New York alternative punk rock scene, because, like I said, punk rock kind of had a U.S. version and a British version.
Yes.
And in the U.S. version, where you have probably the Ramones is probably the other most famous originator in the U.S. And the Police were playing in that scene as well as a bunch of others, and in England, of course, you've got the Sex Pistols. They are the quintessential punk band, and they're quickly a bunch of fans congeal around them, and they're called the Bromley Contingent. Okay, And what's really interesting, there's a who was the '70s interview guy? David
Frost.
David Frost.
David
or
Frost.
Dick Cavett.
It was Dick Cavett, I think. Might have been Dick Cavett, and he had
The guy who interviewed Forrest Gump.
yeah. He had Malcolm McLaren and the Sex Pistols on, but they also had in the background all these people from the Bromley contingent. So they were all on TV. Just so he was, McLaren was sitting there, like kind of holding court, kind of like a dick, basically. And he was, very, because that was part of the punk rock thing, was
Yeah,
to,
that's right, yeah.
give everybody the middle finger, not just the establishment, but everybody.
Yeah.
And which of course, as a teenager, that's what they like. They want to see all of the adults. Want to give them all the finger. But what's interesting is that Bromley contingent became the starting point for a bunch of groups. Most notably, Susie and the Banshees. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, Susie is in the background of that video. As I was watching it, I'm looking at all the people around, and I was like getting around, and I was like, "Holy crap, that's Susie Sue!" And so that was just really interesting. So the Clash comes out of the Bromley contingent.
I'm glad you mentioned the Clash.
The Slits and Generation X, which is fronted by a very young Billy Idol.
Yes.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And a group called X-Ray Specs. Those are probably the most famous coming out of the Bromley contingent. All of those that became musicians.
Yeah.
And so this kind of explodes in that last 5 years of the 70s. Mm-hmm. And so now you've got the Clash, Susie and the Banshees, The Cure, the Police, the Ramones, Blondie, who becomes part of this kind of into it as part of one of that kind of music, even though the group rather, predates it. David Bowie kind of gets into this kind of music, or associated with it.
He reinvents himself a few times.
He does, yes.
Yeah.
He was always very good at
in
that.
the new wave, new romantic movement.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad you mentioned the Clash and Blondie. They're simply landmark. I mean, there was a time the Clash was called the only band that mattered.
Really?
I mean, that's how the Clash was thought of in the punk scene, along with the Ramones. Mm-hmm. And then Blondie, again, we talked about this a little bit in show prep. Debbie Harry, really the first rock goddess.
Right.
There are other influential and important female performers, but as far as just a rock and roller, does whatever she wants, massive sexuality, and incredible talent. She's it.
Right.
She's the big dog with Blondie, and there was a moment nobody's bigger than Blondie.
Right.
Amazingly.
Right. She's one that the group. We always say this because we always think Debbie Harry, but the Blondie is the group, not her.
Not her.
In fact, she always resented being called that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For all the right reasons.
But you call yourself Blondie and you're the bleach blonde front singer. What do you think's going to happen?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. But she's probably one of the most, well, not one of the most successful mainstreamed acts. Partially that's probably because she's got roots prior. So I mean, she'd been around quite a while before then. The group had, so that kind of helped, I'm sure. But there's a lot of these names we have mentioned have become mainstream. They've become the classics. Yeah. When you look at the Police, their Synchronicity album, in my opinion, and my son, I asked him this once. I said, "Son, what is the best album you can think of, start to finish?" What's he say? Synchronicity by the Police.
Yeah.
Because start to finish, in my opinion, that is one of the best all-around albums ever.
One of those
there is very little
albums
filler,
that
with the possible exception of Mother.
Yeah.
But it's a fun song.
It's
though,
one of those albums
so.
that everybody had.
Yes.
Everybody had that. Meatloaf, Spat Out of Hell. It's
Oh,
one
yeah.
of those albums everybody
and
had.
we just talked about Jim Steinman just passing. I did a blog post on Jim Steinman.
Yeah.
So that was a huge album. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about the Police and again that moment where they're the biggest thing in the world. It happens for them.
And Synchronicity was really their biggest impact.
It's not.
And of course, then they break
Orlando
up.
Still More. It is Zenyatta Mandata, and on to Ghost in the Machine and Synchronicity.
Yeah.
Right, and those are all great albums.
Yeah.
But really, Synchronicity is, I mean,
It's
they
the one
quit when they
pinnacle.
peaked. They really did.
And that's one of the
Which
reasons.
is such a shame.
Well, it gives them a beloved quality
Yeah.
that maybe had some what was it they said in the movie Highlander? It's better to
burn out than fade away.
Yeah, that's right.
So, well, and all three of them went on to successful careers. Obviously, Sting the most successful with his solo career, and he kind of reinvents himself into more of a softer rock kind
of a jazz performer type.
Yeah. Although his Dream of the Blue Turtles,
I was going to say that
was the most Police-like album.
It was an excellent album.
It was, yes. That was another one. Not a whole lot of filler on that one, but I think there's still a lot of Police influence in that particular one. But you look at those groups that I listen to, their influence is a little bit harder to see because you don't necessarily, because they weren't as mainstream as those who followed them that claimed them as influences.
Yeah.
But probably the most successful of those groups is The Cure, because they have probably lasted the longest. At least the longest staying together and producing music continuously. Although, really, you could put U2 in that, because they did start also in that. It's a gross oversight not to mention U2.
Yeah.
But for some reason, they seem to stand apart from the rest of that group for some reason, even though they come from those same roots, that same political, economic, music, protest kind of stuff. But they grew into much more, and obviously, their music has matured greatly and changed over the years. Although honestly, I like that rough edge that a lot of these groups have when they're early on. Yeah. There's more. It seems to be more of an emotional, energetic edge to them.
Yeah.
When you listen to the original version of Pretty in Pink, for instance, versus what was on the soundtrack for the movie, the soundtrack is much more polished, even though it's the exact same notes sung by the exact same guys. But I like that little bit of an edge, which you get with these groups when they're younger.
Especially U2, right?
Yes. Thank you for. I was hoping somebody would catch the pun.
I was working you there.
He would pun would pick a pocket.
Yes.
That's right.
So let me change directions on you though, and again, Otterites. This whole. We're all super different when it comes to music, even though we're not super different on a lot of other topics. I'm the only heavy rock fan, I think. Francis has dabbled a touch.
Oh yeah, I mean, I saw Ozzy Osbourne concert back in the day, and I'm not a huge Sabbath fan. I loved Ozzy though, and
well, Kiss certainly counts for that, doesn't
absolutely,
it?
Yeah, that's right. And AC/DC was always great. Some of their stuff was primo. Not everything.
Well, that's early stuff that I consider more of the hard rock. A lot of the stuff that well, at least some of the stuff I think of when I think of what I think you're going is more some of the hair band heavy metal stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm what I want to do. We're, again, talking about these landmark bands that set a tone, that set a direction, is Sabbath. You're talking about Ozzy.
He was essentially an outgrowth, from Sabbath.
So Black Sabbath is again some of that same milieu. The economic depressed parts of England, working class England. But they're trying to find a way in this kind of blues-infused 60s rock. But the guitarist, Tony Iommi, is missing part of two fingers on one hand. And he detunes his guitar a bit, fuzzes it out, fuzzes the sound out. And they've discovered kind of a whole new blues rock sound. And then they kick in a little bit of, protest, War Pigs. They kick in a little personal angst and Paranoid. A little bit of the occult, a little bit of weirdness, a little bit of maybe marijuana, and a few other things. And suddenly you've got something different.
It's true. It's true.
They were landmark. They were really the first heavy metal band. Sometimes Zeppelin gets kind of kicked in with them. To me, Zeppelin is not a heavy metal band.
No, it's not.
Zeppelin's a hard rock
definitely
band.
need to come back to Zeppelin, though, because when you talk about influential,
yes,
they're certainly one of the biggest.
So maybe for our listeners who really don't have a good grasp of the differences, and I probably don't either, how would you define the difference between the heavy metal bands and the hard rock bands? Besides one being mostly 70s, the other being mostly 80s.
Well, Zeppelin and Black Sabbath are two exemplars of that.
Yes, but what makes them one?
What makes them
I think
one and not the other?
Difference between a hard rock band and a heavy metal band is strictly attitude. if it's a Sabbath sets the bar of we hate everything.
Okay.
I mean, that might be an oversimplification of what metal is, but when they hit in
Well, that's true.
69
It's got roots in punk then too.
Yeah, it does. And that's why a band like Motorhead is important too. Motorhead never wanted to be called a heavy metal band. They wanted to be called a rock and roll band. Yet they had more in common. The metal bands see them as an influence, but they were also the band that if you went to a punk show with a Motorhead jacket, you were okay. You couldn't go to a punk show with an Iron Maiden jacket, but you could go with a Motorhead jacket. They were the crossover. They were the link in between metal and punk with those same sort of attributes.
Real quick, while I'm thinking about this, I need to make a correction. I was talking about the Dick Cavett interview. I think I said Malcolm McLaren was Sid Vicious. I don't know why I said Malcolm McLaren.
Well, McLaren's the manager.
He's the manager, right? But it was Sid Vicious that was sitting there. So
yeah, Johnny Rotten.
I don't know why.
Sid Vicious.
Yeah, I don't know why the heck I said Malcolm McLaren. Other than the fact that I know he's involved. So anybody who heard me say that, no, I'm not. Well, I may be stupid, but I'm not that stupid.
Yeah, he knows. He knows the Pistols.
Yeah, just misspoke.
And I think I've tromped all over something you were going to do, Robert, because we hadn't done Bourbon Break.
Oh, yeah, we were going to do Bourbon Break, yeah.
And I tromped all over top of you to change the subject to Black Sabbath.
That's okay. You start the Bourbon Break.
So I've poured a quick glass of the O.Z. Tyler Quarter Horse Reserve.
Oh, is that what you're drinking now?
Yes.
Oh.
And I'm... Again, the touch of cinnamon, I think, to it. In the flavor notes. A little bit more of the alcohol flavor, I think, is popping in there.
You got your clink there, Robertius. You're
Yes.
using the cubes, it looks like.
Yes, they're really room temperature now, so...
Yeah.
When you drink it neat like I do, it doesn't matter anymore. I just kind of roll with it.
Yes, there is a... I don't know, I guess I'd call this a bit softer than the Woodford.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that's not exactly how you would describe bourbon or any kind of whiskey generally.
It's a more straightforward, less complex flavor, which is not probably what O.Z. Tyler wants to hear about Quarter Horse Reserve. They probably go, oh no, it's 250 flavor profiles. But to me, it's a much more straightforward, fewer notes. Doesn't really have the citrus to it that Woodford does. And again, a little bit of a cinnamon, almost a clove kind of.
Man, I gotta say, you were really good at picking all that stuff out. It must be from the wine drinking you do, because I have a hard time picking out all that distinct stuff.
My palate's not that sophisticated, I'm afraid.
Stop drinking soft drinks.
Really?
They ruin your palate.
Oh,
The
interesting.
sugar ruins
You
your
sound
palate.
like Robert Picard. This ruins your palate, Jean-Luc.
Interesting. So now, is that the sugar? Because I don't drink sugar drinks. I drink diet.
That's kind of the thing. Careful now.
He's all choked up.
He's all choked up.
It's the sweetness, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I'll be darned. Well, maybe I should drink more bourbon, I suppose.
Well, that's not a bad thing. Well, in excess, that would be a bad thing.
Well, of course, that's
yes.
right. Yeah, well, that's not going to happen. I can tell
Yes.
you that. You guys know that.
So.
Wonderful. That's a good bourbon break, gentlemen.
What
Old tub. I'm sticking with going with what we know.
Yes.
We got it all laid out here at Studio M.
Yes.
Indeed. Who do we still need to talk about?
Well,
I got two. But
two that you want to talk about?
yeah, at least one. Yeah.
I kind of hogged everything, then throwing in Black Sabbath.
You were kind of a war
You
pig.
kind of, but that's all right.
You kind of war pig, did you not?
Yeah, but I wanted to lay them out there because of that influence of being that first heavy metal band that then leads into all the things that came out of that, and you already talked about Kiss and Ozzy and everything.
Yeah.
Well,
That's where it comes from.
So I'll pick up from there, and I guess maybe do this in reverse order. But what I want to talk about next, and you guys talk about what you want. One of the reasons that I mentioned the bands that I did, those are ones that I really like as well.
Yeah.
So that kind of helps. But I mean, they really were influential on ones that came after, or they were pioneers.
Yeah.
The Cure has done an ungodly number of albums. I think they may probably have even done more than U2. But there's they just keep doing it, but they don't necessarily get the big fanfare that some of the other groups do. Susie and the Banshees now are broken up, but Susie and Budgie, the drummer, had done this side group called the Creatures. A lot of Japanese influence. Some really good stuff there. So, these guys that started out in this really angsty, angry protest kind of stuff where there's a lot of screaming, even in early Banshees stuff, they matured and became real musicians. Susie Sue has had an incredible voice. Now she's a lifelong smoker, and it took a toll on her throat.
Oh, really?
I don't know if she's done one since Manta Ray, but that was her solo album. There's some good stuff on there, but you can tell the difference between that and even just 10 or 15 years prior, some of the last stuff they did together as the Banshees. It's just not as smooth, which is unfortunate. It's still good, and I love it, but it just doesn't sound. The voice has lost a little bit of quality, but that's also true of anybody when they grow older. This is going to happen.
We're talking about a lot of bands who are still out there.
They're collecting Social Security now.
I mean the Stones are bridging 70 plus,
right?
So they're everybody's voices change.
It happens.
Pete Townsend's not the guitar player he used to be,
right? So I understand that, and you hear it when in the Cure. Although I got to say, the Cure has probably maintained the most. Their sound the most.
The makeup doesn't look as good on Robert Smith as
it doesn't. He probably could use to lose a few pounds.
Yeah, kind of
as well. But that's also age.
Calm down the hair a little bit. Yeah. It's kind of done its thing.
They all matured into really good musicians.
And let me say, for a metalhead, I do like the Cure. I mean, Friday I'm in Love. And, and then what's
all kinds
show me how you do that.
Actually,
what is the name of that song? Why do I always blank on the name of that song, even though it's my favorite Cure song?
Oh no!
Anyway,
you see, I'm awful with titles.
A brain fart happened.
Yes.
Anyway, go ahead, Francis. We haven't let you come in with another couple here.
No, Led Zeppelin. We've got to talk more about Led Zeppelin.
Okay, go for it.
The influence that band has had has been some of the greatest in rock and roll ever. What pinged me on that is there's certain things everybody had, and Led Zeppelin certainly was one of the
Led Zeppelin 4.
Well, yeah, that's if you're going to pick pick one of those. But my goodness, there's so many different. I mean, Led Zeppelin 1, 2, and 3. A Physical Graffiti, Houses of the Holy, In Through the Outdoor, which was kind of their last. They did Coda after that. It wasn't quite the same. I mean, Robert Plant has got a voice that's just kind of amazing. It's very different. There are some folks that absolutely do not like it, can't stand the way he sings. My wife is one of them, and I still don't understand that, but be it so.
Just Like Heaven. Sorry.
Oh, yes.
Just Like Heaven, the Cure song, Just Like Heaven.
Yes.
Yeah, and Stairway to Heaven is still, if you had to pick one rock song only, it would be one of the contenders.
That complexity, the symphonic quality of it.
Yes, the musical talent that these folks have. Jimmy
Page, he's a good guitar player.
Yeah, he is still considered to be perhaps the greatest in the world. Of course, that's it's always debatable.
Yeah, that's always an opinion thing.
There's nobody that would disagree with his quality.
Yeah,
and he and Robert Plant have done some things together themselves. After, of course, when John Bonham died, I almost said Bono died. Bono's still very much alive. Let me make sure I get that clear. When John Bonham passed away, it was over. He was. It's hard to imagine the drummer could be that influential. That there is no such thing without him. But he was one of those that's just very true.
Yeah, that was a rare thing with a band that said, "Oh, we're not going on." Bands tend to churn drummers a ton.
Well, yeah, Keith Moon's the obvious choice.
Well, part of the reason for that is musically they're probably most easily replaced.
Yeah,
but also they're least likely to be the singer.
Least likely to be the singer.
Genesis and Phil Collins aside,
and which is a good example. I mean, a good exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, again, a band like Sabbath is a good exemplar. When you're under pressure to continue to put out material, the record company don't care.
Yeah,
they will chew up everybody except the two songwriters.
Yep.
or the songwriter. So Bill Ward got chewed up and spit out by the record company for Sabbath.
Yeah, sometimes though,
and it happened to a ton of bands.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's the bands doing that, you know,
Yeah.
especially the area that we've primarily been talking about. You know, drugs took a huge toll on the music scene, and it still does.
It
And
does.
it
But
still
it
does.
was a ton of pressure. Get out there, play every night.
Yeah.
Then when you're done playing, get in the studio, record something,
Right, 'cause
then
you
get
had
back
to.
out. There's the only way to make money.
It was.
to get
There's
back
no
out.
internet downloads, any of that stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, your ways of making money were a bit
And
limited.
touring on your old material was unheard of. You couldn't charge $200 a seat to come play 30-year-old songs.
Right. Well, unless now you can. but
Now
yeah.
you can. I mean, the Eagles make bazillions doing it.
I didn't even talk about the Eagles. Let's save that for another time. Because we're getting close to time here. We'll save the Eagles are their own thing. Fleetwood Mac is their own thing. That was the other one I was
Well,
going to
you know,
mention.
all of the stuff we've talked about, you know, like I said, I've gravitated to the stuff that I like, which some of it also did have a major impact on people, even though you don't really know. I like the fact that you like the Cure. That album, the Galore album, has a lot of good stuff on there. A lot of good stuff.
Yeah. Why Can't I Be You?
Yeah.
And all that is all on there.
You know, and there's some of that stuff has now become iconic. What's really sad, this is how you know it's become so iconic, is I've heard elevator music versions of some of the stuff that I listened to in the 80s.
I've heard Elvis Costello in the grocery store.
Oh my God! See, that's the kind of stuff that. Yeah, see, it didn't even talk about Elvis Costello.
When
how
Elvis
big he
Costello
was.
becomes background music, it's like you've penetrated the psyche
Oh yeah.
of the public.
Also, Eurythmics is another group that
Annie Lennox has got
Annie
an amazing
Lennox.
voice.
Yes,
Amazing voice.
she is phenomenal. Talking about all around good albums, I think it was the final one they did as a group. If it's not within the final, it was the next to last. Savage is a great one. Just fantastic stuff. And so many of the groups that they all seem to have one of those albums that is just full of really good stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
They were
that
really
everybody
right.
loves.
Yeah.
Often that's the ultimate one that they've done, the last one, unfortunately. But there's just so many. Violent Femmes. Oh my gosh, Violent Femmes.
I mean, that's one of those. It's like that's the bottle rocket of rock music. You know, whoosh, pow, ooh.
But you know
But
what?
it's over.
No, but you know what? They did like 4 or 5 albums that if I were to play some of the music from it, you would probably recognize from those multiple. It wasn't just the original Violent Femmes that came out in the mid '80s.
Yeah.
But yeah, I saw them in concert.
It wasn't just added up. And,
No.
And yeah.
You know, though, you had again penetrated the common cultural consciousness when your alternative independent music becomes the basis for a movie and a soundtrack, which is the John Cusack Hitman movie, Grosse Point Blank.
Grosse Point Blank. Love Grosse Point Blank.
Oh my gosh, I love that movie just for the soundtrack.
Just the soundtrack's amazing.
But yeah, that
Adam
was
Driver
a
was
great,
terrific.
great film. Great film.
Let me circle back though to one thing about what Francis was talking about, especially with Led Zeppelin, and that's this role of the frontman,
Oh yeah.
the rock and roll iconic frontman.
Well, the lead singer's going to have that.
Yeah, the Mick Jagger, the Robert Plant,
yeah.
you know, that iconic rock and roll, the Ozzy Osbourne.
Yeah.
But you know, it is a different thing because you look at the Beatles, even the Monkees, some other groups, multiple guys in those bands sung.
That's true.
But then you get this thing where there's only one guy who sings.
Yeah.
And that's not always true because, you look at Van Halen, David Lee Roth, he left so he could be the only guy who sings.
Yeah. And they wrote in Sammy Hagar, who did a fine job. It was
Right.
very different.
It's different.
And Eddie Van Halen, may he rest in peace, by
Yes.
the way, passed away. Marvelous talent, amazing talent. Yes, one of the greatest guitar players ever. We were talking about that. He's right up there. We didn't even talk about Van Halen.
Yeah.
Well, now we have.
Another one that penetrated the cultural consciousness, became part of a movie, became part of Better Off Dead with the Everybody Wants Some.
yeah.
And that guitar bit that the hamburger
the
does.
animated, the claymation hamburger.
Yeah.
Playing Everybody Wants Some.
So, it's good. I
Yeah,
tell you though.
there's so
it's
many
good
places
stuff.
we could go. I'm so glad we hit a lot of biggies though.
We did.
There's much more we'll have
Yeah,
to do.
but for instance, I think you had another one or two.
I wanted to mention Fleetwood Mac and I want to mention the Eagles. We don't have time. Just
Yes, I know
put a
Stevie
pin in
Nicks
those.
holds a special place in your
Oh,
heart.
I've had a serious love affair with Stevie Nicks since I was 11.
It's too bad she doesn't know about it.
I know. Right now, she listens to it. Oh, Stevie, I love you. Yes, yes, she is. And to be honest, her music has spoken to me. Her voice has spoken to me. It's just, she's one of the undisputed queens of rock and roll. We all know that.
Yeah.
One of the things I like, because I like a lot of the female acts, but one of the reasons why is that the ones I like, they have good voices. The men don't necessarily have good voices all the time.
Yeah.
They can get by sometimes, depending on with
Attitude.
lower, with attitude and yelling into the microphone somewhat melodically.
Yeah.
But the women, they seem to not be able to get away with that unless they're really hot.
Well, Stevie's got a very unique voice,
Yeah.
and everybody knows her voice. And she's also an amazingly prolific songwriter, which she brought something to Fleetwood Mac in the 70s that was very different than what they had. And Lindsay did too. I mean, I don't want to disparage either one of them, because they both brought what was exactly needed with some great talent that was already there.
Yeah, the Fleetwood Mac that we know today is
those five
is
people.
Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks and their dysfunctional relationship.
Well, Rumors was another one of those albums everybody had. There's
Everybody
a reason
knew
that
it.
album has sold gazillions of copies and still does today, because the music still holds up.
Yeah.
We need to further this discussion on the blog
We
at
need to-
www.snakesandotters.com.
I know. I feel I need to do a Pink Floyd post because I didn't even talk about them.
Right.
Well, I think I'll do a Stevie post. I have to do.
Because in each one of our...
I owe it to Stevie. Yes.
Our genres of music, there's so much more each one of us could have talked about. Each one of us could have captained an episode just about our particular slice of music.
Interesting you say that, because this is not a one and done topic. We're going to revisit this. Rock and roll bands we have to listen to, music we always love to listen to. It's going to be a reoccurring series for us, a mini series that appears at least annually.
I'll hold Fleetwood Mac not Fleetwood. I'll hold Pink Floyd to that.
You can hold to that. That's great. Trust me, there's lots more we can talk about.
And the Eagles. We'll hold the Eagles till then.
Very influential.
All right, what's next?
We're going back to World War II, guys.
Of course.
Next
week is history.
That's right. Next week is a history. I almost said history album, but it's I'm trying to cleanse myself of that language. History episode. And Martin, I think you're the one that came up with the idea of using this. The Plot to Kill Hitler, Operation Valkyrie.
Yep.
Tom Cruise did a actually pretty decent movie.
That was a good movie.
And this is at a time when Cruise's star was falling in many ways. He'd done some things that hadn't done well, and people were saying, "Oh, we can't bank on him anymore." Valkyrie kind of turned that around. They were expecting it to be not much, and I'll give Cruise credit. He did a hell of a job with that movie and rehabilitated himself in many ways. It's very, very accurate, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that one moment. We like to personalize it. We've talked about the big picture stuff so far. This gets a little bit smaller. We're going to bring the microscope down a little bit and go into this one moment and somewhat of a what if, somewhat of what did happen, and what do we think about it. So join us next episode. You'll love it.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review, because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.